The ability to draw money can be a point of contention amongst the wrestling industry. Now, there are some wrestlers who really don't care how much money they make their company, they just care how much money they make themselves. However, there are many other wrestlers who take it as a point of pride when discussing their ability to earn money for their promotion. And when it comes to that mentality, wrestlers and wrestling fans will continue to debate who is the all-time top earner. And we're all about to join that conversation ourselves, because today, Dave knows who's the biggest money draw in wrestling history. Now, in previous videos, I have discussed this topic before, and if you've seen those videos, you know that my answer as to who is the biggest money draw of all time, well, it's Stone Cold Steve Austin as far as I'm concerned. Furthermore, you might be wondering, how is this a debate? Aren't there hard numbers to prove this mathematically? Well, yes, but also no. While it does sound ludicrous to argue against hard numbers, there are logical reasons why statistics can be argued against in this case. And these arguments, as well as some additional information, are the exact reasons why I'm dedicating yet another episode to this topic. So while I still maintain my stance that Austin is the biggest draw, today I'm going to run down some of his heaviest opposition for the crown and talk about why I still think that the Rattlesnake comes out on top. And to be clear, this is a discussion, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments on whether or not you agree, because it's the debate that I find truly fascinating. Alright, to begin, let's start the process of elimination by narrowing down the field. Now remember, inflation is something to keep in mind here. One of the biggest arguments against hard numbers is that you have to look at how far a dollar goes during the time period in question. For my purposes, I do believe that adjusting for inflation is the fair way to do this. Next, keep in mind the size and scope of the market. As much as I like wrestlers from WWF's New Generation era, and as much as I appreciate wrestlers who dominated in their own NWA and foreign countries as well, realize that they do not compete on the highest levels when it comes to drawing money. The WWE is easily the biggest and most financially successful wrestling company of all time, with a national and global reach that draws money from so many more people than a smaller promotion could ever dream of. But that's not to say that there aren't some non-WWE wrestlers who are suitable contenders for the throne, because there definitely are, which we will be getting to. I'm just pointing out that as much as I like wrestlers like Kurt Angle, and as popular as Jerry Lawler was in his prime, and as much money as the Von Erichs made, guys like these don't come close to the amount of revenue needed to be one of the biggest draws ever. Very successful? Absolutely, but not the kind of numbers we need for the very top. And this is not a slight against them in any way, I'm just saying that this is not about how great or talented they were, and they were, this is purely just about dollars and cents. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's move into our first contender for Austin's crown, Jim Landis. Now, many of you may not be familiar with this name, but Jim Landis was a very popular wrestler around the 1930s. And by very popular, I mean very popular. Many wrestling historians will state that he is the biggest box office draw in wrestling history. He has been said to have earned attendance numbers up to 100,000 people. And we're not talking about dollar amounts, so don't worry about inflation. That's physical people in seats. Now, bear in mind, Ric Flair has almost doubled that, but it was only for one show. And this question isn't about the biggest one-time hit, it's about the biggest grossing wrestler of all time. And sadly, Ric Flair has some really low numbers to balance things out. But Landis, on the other hand, has been said to average around 80,000 on the regular, which is not something that Flair nor Austin have been known for doing. In fact, Austin's highest gate ever as a main eventer is WrestleMania 17, which was around 67,000, fairly shy of 80 grand, let alone 100K. So with that being said, how is Austin ahead of Landis? Well, the debate isn't who is the biggest box office draw, it's about who is the biggest money draw. People may have come from all over just to see Landis wrestle, but that isn't the only source of income to take into account here. Austin has t-shirts, video games, toys, all things that were not staples of the industry during Landis' time. And while I am willing to make adjustments for inflation, I can't remove merch from the equation. It's just too important. And it's also not Landis' fault that they didn't have merch opportunities in his era like they do now, but it's not Austin's fault either. And with all that being said, this also removes your Gorgeous Georges, your Bruno Sammartinos, and really any wrestler before the late 20th century. Furthermore, excluding merch, other advancements are important to remember too, such as television. While there were tons of people there to see Landis in person, realized that they had no other choice if they wanted to see him at all. Austin, on the other hand, could be seen from the comfort of a person's living room. So while Austin might not have had 100,000 to see him live, he has had millions and millions watching him from all around the world, which is way more people in the long run and does contribute to his financial total because those viewers brought revenue along with them. But that does remind me, speaking of the millions, The Rock is an obvious contender to Austin in this department. After all, much of their success came at around the same time, so it's even harder to distinguish a difference between the two. And this is a major problem when it comes to deciphering this as a whole, and where a lot of the debate actually comes from. When we see a high-grossing show for the WWE, how do we know who specifically made them that money? In all likelihood, it's probably a combination of factors and the work of an entire company. And while yes, some have brought in more bucks than others, there's no real metric to say specifically who brought in what. However, after stating that, it doesn't mean that there aren't some conclusions that can be drawn from the numbers that we do have. And in the case of Austin versus The Rock, while they do occupy much of the same space, making it hard to distinguish between the two, they do have some separate numbers to examine. For example, The Rock does hold a distinct advantage over Austin. The pay-per-view with the biggest buy rate of all time is WrestleMania 28, which featured John Cena versus The Rock as the main event. Austin did not have a match on the card, so we can clearly label this as a Rock win. However, Austin does have ground over The Rock too. While The Rock has the highest pay-per-view buys, and that's buys, not dollars, so inflation isn't a factor still, Austin has more pay-per-view main events in total. So overall, Austin has contributed more to the pay-per-view scene. And in addition, Austin has the highest TV ratings of all time too. While the highest episode of Monday Night Raw ever featured Austin partnering up with Mr. McMahon and, well, The Rock, the highest rated segment of all time happened in June of 1999, and it was a match between The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Oh, and just to be clear, we're talking about wrestling revenue, so The Rock's film totals don't count to this equation. Furthermore, it can be argued that without Austin to save the company, The Rock never would have gotten the chance to become the megastar that he was. But if all that still isn't proof enough for you, there is one more thing to consider. Stone Cold also beats The Rock in terms of merchandise sales by a significant amount, and that is something that there is no mistaking who's the bigger earner. However, while Austin does gross more on merch than The Rock, it should be noted that Austin isn't the highest WWE merch seller of all time. He's actually number 2. Number 1 is John Cena has made more money in merchandise for the WWE than any other wrestler ever. That coupled with his pay-per-view buy rate for the WrestleMania he main evented with The Rock, and John Cena seems to be another top contender. However, there are things to take into account. First, Cena has never beaten Austin or even The Rock in terms of peak sales. Cena's merch money comes from his sheer longevity with the company. Compiling all of Cena's years against Austin's really isn't a fair comparison. Again, because Cena's average on a yearly basis is nowhere near as high. But even if you're still not convinced about that, also keep in mind that unlike The Rock and Austin, who scored most of their bucks at the same time, Cena and Austin are separated by quite a bit of distance, and in which case, inflation does come into play, and things definitely change in favor of the Rattlesnake in that case. And plus, yet again, in terms of television ratings, Austin comes out on top, by far, which is why the Doctor of Dunkanomics is not really a top contender. And finally, this leaves the big one. Hulk Hogan. What makes Hogan unique is that not only did he have his wildly successful WWF run, but he also did really well in WCW too, excelling in both boom periods of his time. If anyone was the biggest threat to Austin in terms of being the biggest money draw, it would have to be the Hulkster. After all, he was there when WCW had higher ratings than the WWF. He has also had some of the biggest attendance numbers of all time with WrestleMania 3 and 18. And he is in the top 5 for merch sales. But yet again, this is where the problem lies. Hogan's Hulkamania shirts did do good business, but they're nothing in comparison to Austin shirts. Nor are they close to NWO shirts either. And in which case, there are two problems with that. WCW wasn't known for keeping hard numbers for merch like the WWE, especially now that the WWE is a publicly traded company, that information like this has to be made available. Also, is it fair to count all NWO shirts as Hogan shirts? Because if you do count them as such, I think Hall and Nash might have to disagree. But I will say that it also wouldn't be fair to divide the hard numbers, if we had them, evenly across all NWO members, because some help to sell more t-shirts than others. But there's also no way we can know exactly who sold how much, yet again. And it should be noted that while slight inflation adjustments can be made for Hogan's 80s run, it's definitely less of a factor because, as popular as Hulkamania was, and even though it may have started wrestling's merchandising boom, it doesn't compare to the late 90s and all the stuff Hogan did during during that time. But it's also important to remember that in terms of attendance, Hogan does have the edge over Austin. But yet again, that doesn't compare to the numbers in terms of television. Because Austin has the advantage in terms of pay-per-view buy rates. Plus, in terms of TV ratings, again, Austin reigns supreme over Hulk by a long shot. Well, there you go, just some interesting thoughts about who drew the most money. After hearing all of this, are you with me and you think it's Stone Cold Steve Austin, or do you think it's someone else? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and this has been Dave Knows.